Hey everyone, thanks for listening today. I'm Christine Passo. I'm a support and transformation coach for midlife women, and I'm also the host of Unconscious Evolution. Today, I so very warmly welcome two amazing women and co hosts of the podcast, All the Grief. I'm
Hey,
so glad you're
Christine.
both here today.
Thank
I jumped
you.
the gun. I'm so excited.
I love that. You
We're
know what?
very excited. Yeah.
I mean, nothing should go as always planned because then it just seems too scripted. And that's not
Yeah.
how I roll.
That's
And
Yeah.
right. So now you all know this is real and live.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So let's learn about my guests, Andrea and Rebecca. Andrea Herron-Mathern is a podcast host, facilitator, and guide. Andrea supports individuals moving through grief, searching for confirmation of their purpose, and supports those on a journey to motherhood. Rebecca Luttrell is a psychotherapist, grief counselor, and co host of All the Grief podcast. She currently offers multiple grief support groups online and in person in the beautiful Colorado area. Both Andrea and Rebecca's contact info will be in the show notes, so please reach out to them. They are absolutely lovely. And in addition, start following them on Instagram for their podcast posts. So thank you both again for being here. And before I get into the depth of what do you want to share with us today, I'd really love to hear what brought the two of you together to start All the Grief.
What a good question. I'll start because I feel like I kicked the ball down the road.
You did.
And it's so fitting with your sort of like the work that you do, Christine, which, transformation coaching. So my father passed away in May of 2020. And it was a total shock. He had been in the hospital, but was literally coming home the next day and died really suddenly. And it was COVID time, so I had not seen him since March. It was just not nobody like imagines a passing, but it certainly is not what we would have even envisioned. And Rebecca was one of the only people that I knew that was my peer who had lost a parent. And so I latched onto her. I could go and I could be sad and I could be seen and I could be understood. And we would just sit. She has this like magical cottage house. And like you're like, oh, fairies play here. It's like really feels magical. And then on top of that, she has this like low slung sofa and this like super warm vibe. And we would just sit on her sofa and she would listen to me. So in those early days, those early years, she was one of my people that I could just be sad and she could hold it. And our friendship sort of continued and blossomed. And then we were going to meet for dinner one night. And I was like, we need to do a podcast. Like, because what I started to realize was that I was pretty vocal about my grief. I didn't mind talking about my dad. I didn't hide when I was having a hard day or a hard moment. And then people would share their grief with me. And I was like, people are sad all over and nobody's talking about it. It reminded me of infertility or of giving birth. Like, it's like after you're in the club, people talk to you about it. But
Yeah.
otherwise, everybody's just walking around like this isn't happening. And so we went to dinner, and I think you were telling me about another podcast that you were already prepping. And I was like, shit, well, I was going to ask you to do a podcast too. And I was like, so you two do it or you do it? Like, I'd love to do it with you, but what I know is it just needs to get into the world. And so that was kind of how it started. I don't remember, Rebecca, if you sort of
It
then
was
had like
anything.
a 24-hour light bulb moment.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yes, I was at the time, I had kind of just like a fun side project with my brother and cousin where we talk
Right.
about movies, and they're both really big movie buffs and I'm not, but it's like a love letter to them that I show up for that. Um and I love it. I mean, I just absolutely love interacting with them and hating on movies that they love. And and then I had another friend who wanted to start a podcast, and so I was really excited about that. For a lot of reasons, it has since dissolved. We have some recordings, but we're like, it's just too much work on And it was too hard on our friendship in multiple ways, not because we didn't love it, but because we were like, now we're spending all of our time podcasting and not interacting. And so we let that project go. But at the time, I thought that was happening. So I'm just telling Andrea, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this podcast with my friends. It'll be so great. And Andrea said, yes. Oh, I was also thinking about asking you to be on do a grief podcast. So I thought about it, and I kept thinking, like, could I do 3 podcasts? And what I knew was this is such a yes for me. And for similar reasons, we need more conversations about grief in our world. And I was like, I would absolutely love to be contributing to that. And I can't think of someone I'd love to do that with more. And the beauty of it is, even through the experience with my other friend, of feeling like we were mostly business partners and our friendship was like harder to make contact with, this feels like we've become even closer friends over this year. We're constantly leaving each other voice messages. It's just fun and easy. So that's how we ended up starting our podcast.
I love hearing, first of all, when we finish this recording, I'm just going to go ahead and go to Delta and book my plane ticket to come to your country cottage and sit
It's so
and lay
great.
in your comfy sofa, your deep sofa. I mean, Andrea, I'll send you the details. We can meet there.
Great. Perfect. I love it. I'm in.
And you know what? I bet you my listeners right now are like, I need to know where this house is. So I too
This little cottage is, it's so,
yes. Oh my gosh. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. So I'll keep you posted on my details.
So you're not distracted.
Yes. Let us know your travel plans.
But I also, when you talked about how we just don't talk about grief enough, that it amazes me with the number of people that I talk to, and they said, well, why do you talk about grief? It's so depressing. And I said, well, what does grief mean to you? And to every single person, it means end of life. And then when I explained to them that they're grieving every minute of their day because of where they moved 6 years ago, that they still feel like they're not home, or the job that they lost, or the relationship, the childhood unresolved pain, like all these things. And I literally can watch their eyes open and expand, and they go, oh my gosh, you're so right. Why isn't anybody talking about it? And so for you to say that, I'm validating you, it like as much as possible. And it's why I continue to talk about it too, because we don't feel safe talking about grief unless we do find that common denominator person who we feel okay talking to about it, like what you found with Rebecca. And so please, what you're doing is so incredibly important. I'm grateful. I love what you guys do. You're so kind. Like, your approach is so soft and gentle. Like, I can get a bit more excitable, but that vibe, which really puts me on Rebecca's sofa. It's just so like soft, cuddly, and warm and welcoming. And thank you so much for what you guys do.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you. It's so interesting. One of our 8,000 voice notes we were leaving each other, was telling Rebecca one day that I have a really good friend who's also a therapist. And he was like, I've finally gotten, time to listen to your podcast, and I've been binging it. And I just keep thinking about, like, how do you sit with that sadness all the time? And it just kind of hit me. And I was like, I don't feel like I am sitting with sadness. I feel like I'm sitting with love all the time. Like, I get to see the depths of a mother's love, the depths of a child's love, a depths of the desire for a life that you dreamed of. And I'm like, there are sad moments, but I feel like I'm reading a love letter with some really touching, heartfelt pieces of it. I don't feel like I'm reading or watching a sad movie. It feels so different. So I'm glad that you talked about it, because I think Rebecca and I don't walk around feeling, we're not like Eeyores, and I love Eeyores of the world, but we're not, we don't, we're not walking around sad all the time.
Yeah. I totally agree. There's actually somebody just recently said, how many client sessions do you do in a day, or how, what's your limit? Right. And I was like, fill my day. And they said, but that's so heavy. It's got to be so hard. I was like, I love it. I love it. There is inspiration in whatever the words are that come through and come out of my client. So I know what you're talking about. And Rebecca, if you were going to comment on that, I would love to hear with the, the really very important work
Yeah.
that you do.
I mean, it started for me, even the desire to become a therapist. Everyone was like, why would you want to sit with people complaining all day? Or, just like, and just hearing like the worst of life. And it's, it's so tricky for me to even put into words. So I'm like, I'm working really hard. My brain is working really hard right now, but it's something around something that I think so many of us didn't get, and definitely that this culture struggles with, because we do have a very strong sort of happiness bias, or like, manifest the best things. So that means don't think anything negative, or don't be in hard things. So then they're like, oh my gosh, you're going to listen to hard things all day, then you're going to collapse. It's going to be terrible. And it's just I don't know, it feels like a generosity of spirit in some ways, of just we all just long to be heard. And so it's removing, I've done enough work around learning to ground myself, that I'm not like getting sucked into, maybe it's a really traumatic story, or something that would be hard for a lot of people to hear. I'm just listening to, oh, you want someone to witness this, and you want someone to hear this, and I see the relief that happens for people when that happens. And so it's just, I'm like, I don't know why I have that capacity, but I'm here to do this work, and to just hear people's grief. And that's, my practice switched multiple times into being all grief. I now am moving towards running all groups, because I believe there's something about being in community and being witnessed by people who are in a similar place as us. So sometimes I'm not in grief. And if you're in grief and you're coming to me, it's like, do you even get me? Because you're not sad right now, but there's something about being in community where we can witness each other's sadness and know that it's okay to be falling apart in our grief. And so I don't know. And I think my own grief has taught me that experience of letting yourself feel these really intense, sad feelings actually makes space to feel vitality, aliveness, like all the things that we are craving, of just like, I want to be happy and I want to feel enriched in the world. And if you're trying to not feel your grief, you're going to block all of that too. So
I have to go with this. And who knows, maybe this is how this whole episode is going to go. We're just going to go with it, right?
That's right. That's right.
Because that's sharing what you're feeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the part about essentially chasing happiness, choosing joy, right? I read this post on Instagram about a week ago that said the best thing you can do for yourself is to choose to be good and choose to feel good. That's what it was. And immediately I thought, that's not necessarily a choice. I mean, if all we're doing is brushing away the feelings that are keeping us in that repetitive cycle of not feeling well or not coping healthfully with our grief, because everybody's saying, well, just choose happiness, just feel the joy. And I commented and I said, I feel this is really unfair. And we're dishonoring the people who are struggling and really trying to fight through. We're saying, we don't want to hear it. I don't want to be burdened with what you're thinking about and feeling right now. So just choose to feel good. And there have been the most likes to my comment on, it was like one of these really big posts and a series of comments underneath of supporting that, my essential philosophy for, you're allowed to feel however you feel. And the more we chase happiness, the less likely we're going to be able to find it, because we continue to hoard all those upset feelings. And some people are like, oh, and I can know, especially on LinkedIn, I can sense when people are like, oh, Christine, here she comes again with the grief and the loss, and they're like, well, today I just feel so good and I'm so grateful. And, this toxic positivity, and it makes me feel so ill for the people that are struggling, that now they feel like they have to perform. And this is the society we live in.
Absolutely. I think a lot about, especially when I had kids, to think about how we do these black and white worlds of like things are good or things are bad. And like your viewers and listeners can extrapolate that as far as they want. But this sort of like polarization of the world, and we do that with feelings. Like there are good feelings and there are bad feelings. And I'm like, there are just feelings and we're going to feel them all. And so I always think about Brene Brown writes this, she talks about like, there are not like good and bad. There are just like choices. Like sometimes we make good choices and sometimes we make bad choices. And so she was talking about like her dog running around with somebody's shoe in their mouth or something. And she's like, bad dog, bad dog. And her kid was like, not a bad dog, bad choice, And so that's the kind of like things that my boys and I talk about is like when we start to say things are good or bad, it creates one like hiding, it creates performance of like, well, then I'll just hide my bad feelings or my bad behavior from you so that it can present as good all the time. And it just creates so much dysfunction and dishonesty within ourselves and between each other. And the more we can bring what you're saying to light, which is like feelings are just feelings and we're going to have them all. And it's the full spectrum. And like Rebecca said, without that light and dark, we can't have the full experience. And so being able to allow ourselves a moment of deep sadness or grief or confusion or eruptions of, healthy anger allow us then to experience like the beauty of quiet and still and amazement and love and connection and happiness and joy and really like its fullness.
Yeah.
I think for me, I want to add to what you're saying. I grew up in a household that was really addicted to positive thinking. And I was telling someone, I met with someone yesterday who was curious about my work. Like she's an intern and she was asking me, about my path. And I'm like, well, I started being interested in psychology because I had a literature professor who was like, every paper you write is psychological. And I was like, and what is so cringy is the paper I wrote when she told me that was we had to write a how-to paper and I wrote how to have a positive attitude. And I'm like, I'm sorry to everyone who thought that was any good. But but I was working so hard and simultaneously struggling with this feeling of like, but I feel sad and no, and like I don't, I'm failing now. If I feel sad and I'm supposed to just be happy, I'm a failure. It like lives as shame. There are all these ways. And I remember in an undergraduate philosophy class, there was a professor who was just talking about some piece we were reading. And he said, his thing was, and I don't believe it's as binary as this, but he was like, we live in a world of opposites, day, night, light, dark. And he said, so trying to be happy all the time is like trying to get rid of left by constantly turning right. And I was like, oh, thank you. I needed to hear that. And that sort of carried me forward. And now, when my daughter was about 2, I remember going to the preschool she was attending, and they said, your daughter really loves her feelings. Like they're like, most kids will like fall and they cry and then we pick them up and they like soothe. She cries bigger. And I was like, I couldn't be prouder. You feel those feelings. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I love that so much. That's because, what could happen to her, right? Is that she could end up having kids that tease her then for being
Like,
emotional in that way. It's
yeah.
like, no, put them away or just cheer up, right? Because that's, of course, what we're taught. We're taught we're either going to fix it or we're going to create a sunny day for you. And so I love that for her. And it seems like she's going to be pretty strong with that, which
She is.
I mean,
She's 11
obviously.
now, and like
So
she's
good.
just like, it's like, I mean, and that's the feedback I get from other parents. They're like, like one of her friends had a friend who moved and was actually in tremendous grief. She went to play with her the day the dad was like, she's in a lot of grief. I don't, and I was like, yeah, I feel like she's gonna be fine. that my daughter would be fine hanging out. And then when I picked her up, he's like, she was amazing. She was like, of course you're sad that your friend moved. And I'm like, oh,
Oh,
she just knows to validate feelings because she knows the lived experience of what it is to hear. Of course you feel sad right now. Of course you're angry, like whatever it is. And that I'm like, God, if I all the other things she'll complain about in therapy, this isn't one. One day she'll have a beef with me. She'll be like, my mom was too attuned, or I don't know, something, but I'm like, she was allowed to feel her feelings. So yeah. And it's just important. And I think that it always feels surprising to me when every time I encounter the first time someone has actually felt like it was okay to feel what they were feeling. And I'm like, oh, that's still happening in the world. We still don't know that. I just swim in feeds that are like, feel your feelings. I'm like, everybody knows. I'm not saying anything new. But no, it's still a thing. Yeah.
it is, and it's heartbreaking. And so thank goodness for the two of you, as I've already said, and I will continue to just sing your praises for it because we need it. We don't realize we need it. So a lot of us are not as aware of our emotions until we listen to your podcast, right? Or until it's like we're given that permission. And it's like, oh my gosh, I do have all these feelings because we are so accustomed to wearing the mask to perform or to just let things be okay, even though they're not. And so it's just so important. So I do want to be able to honor the two of you because I'm sure, the idea of the show is what would you like to share today? And so I know, given the deep feelings that you have, that I want you to be able to honor them. So, Andrea, only just because Rebecca, you just finished a little wrap conversation. What would you like to share with us today?
It's so interesting. It's like what you think you're going to want to share, and then we're right here in this conversation. It's really shifted, and I think I keep thinking about this word that you used in terms of describing your own coaching and the services that you provide and the support you provide around transformation. And I think one of the things that I want to share is like, I didn't start like this. I was the little girl who was sort of told, like, there are things that you cry about and things that you don't. And even the things you cry about, like, you cry and then you get over it. You get up, you brush your knees off, and you get moving. And when you talked about like performer, that was a huge part of myself I had to work with. I was, your typical overachiever. I graduated early with top marks. I, went to college and, was like, let me figure out how I can do this like the most difficult way. And got my master's degree and got my PhD and had this incredible job. I mean, everything was like, I wanted to perform. I wanted to be that girl that I think my parents had an idea of who I should be in their heads, for better or worse, like we all do, right? Like I look at my boys and I have to remember, like, what I want for them is what makes them happy and fulfilled. And so even if I have this image in my head, I have to detangle myself from it. And so I'm not like upset with my parents. It's like natural. But I spent so much of my life working to be that person, working to achieve and perform and be the person that everybody expected and wanted me to be. And when my world came crashing down, I was like, holy, I don't think I want to be that person. And so my sort of evolution was sudden and not fun or easy necessarily, but it was absolutely liberating. Like the person I am now, my husband, sometimes I'll like have a breakdown. I'm like, why do you even love me? Like I'm not achievement focused anymore. And I just want to like sit in the woods with Rebecca and like do forest baths. Like, why do you love me? And because I think about the woman I was when we met, which was like driven and like, oh, okay, are we going to have babies or are we going to go for this promotion in California? Like, what are we going to do here? I mean, it was just so different. And he was like, but you are so happy. Like, I can see your content and not happy like every day, sunshine day.
Yeah.
But like contentness with myself a contentness with my life, a contentedness like that allows me to weather when things get really hard. I just came off a really hard season. Rebecca and I are like, when do the clocks turn to 2025? We're good. Let's
Yeah.
reset. But I think that's what I want to share is like, I feel like sometimes I experience people, even like my mentors, and I'm like, I'm too late to the party. Like, holy, you've been doing this forever. You've been like this forever. Sometimes I'm even talking to Rebecca and I'm like, I'm pretty sure you were born this way because I have to work. I have to work to like think about how my heart is today, or, which is how we open our podcast, or how I'm feeling, and access more than like the 5 feelings we were allowed to talk about in my family. And so I just want to share like transformation, and it's ongoing. Like I work every day on some part of myself. I work every day on like undoing things and looking in the mirror and seeing myself and my blind spots and the pieces of myself that just come with this package that maybe I don't love, but I'm learning to like embrace them all the time, every day.
And I love how you mention, of course, that it's ongoing, right? So this is a journey, and there's no way we can ever arrive because life happens.
Yeah.
And life is still going to throw those unexpected events and the grief and the loss and what we don't want. And so we have to always be changing with it. Otherwise, we're just stuck in it from 30 years ago and fighting it. And that takes so much energy, physical energy, emotional energy. So I really love that you said that I think that those who are interested in transforming, they're like, I just want to be fixed. Like, I just want to get to the other side. I just want to be there and land. And it's like, well, you kind of do, but that's in awareness. You land because you're finally awake to, wow, I've been living a life that really isn't essentially the person that I am. Now I can be, and the journey continues. So I appreciate you sharing all of that. And I also love the hard work that you're doing. Like you said, that you think Rebecca came out of the womb this way. And
I know she didn't, but sometimes it feels that way.
No, I did.
Yeah, she did.
Just kidding. She did. She was little baby Buddha girl.
That's awesome. But I love that you talk about how hard it is, that you're really, really going against the grain of who you were raised to be. And that's most of us. I mean, that is most of us, but that's the joy in that growth, in that awareness. So I applaud you for that. And it's how I got to meet you, essentially, because, we're on that journey.
Absolutely.
Okay, Rebecca, what you got?
Okay. Well, I was born this way, so good luck, everybody. Yeah, well, it's so fascinating. And I think it speaks to that sort of what Andrea is saying, which is we meet someone in a space and we think, oh, it's been easy for you, or this is just how life is. It works for you in that way. And I would say that I do think that we're all born with sort of an essential nature. And then I think that the way that life is constructed starts to like form, oh, how do I keep belonging to this? And I remember actually about my birth reading, we had to do this project when I was in graduate school of finding out about what your birth was like. And so I was like, I kind of know, but I don't know. And I asked my mom and she's, oh, it was great. And I'm like, oh, buckle in, like great birth coming through. And she's like, she was knocked out and the doctors pushed for her. And then she said, and then they just took you to the nursery and you never cried, and they would bring you in to feed, for like food, and you just were like not a fussy baby. And I thought, oh, I feel it. I can feel how my whole life was set up around, don't bother. They're not gonna, you'll get your needs met, but like, don't have needs, don't cry about it, don't whatever. And I was like, oh, this is actually saddest story I've ever heard. Like, this isn't an exciting birth story. This is how I entered the world. And so I could feel that sort of caretaker energy, just like coming out of the womb with that. And, I used to call myself an insight junkie. Like I just loved every time I would read a story. Like there's a book, Hope for the Flowers, and it's about caterpillars becoming butterflies, but basically they don't know they're supposed to become butterflies. So they keep climbing the caterpillar pillar because they know they're supposed to be up high somewhere exalted, but they just step on each other's eyes and they, do all these things, not realizing, oh, there's a way that I do that I transform and become who I just am, that doesn't harm other people and or other caterpillars. And that story was like, I mean, it was so inspirational for me around, and it wasn't easy. I mean, everybody probably at this point has heard like caterpillars completely liquefy before they reform into a butterfly, and they feel like the world is over, it's a death. And so recognizing, well, transformation, it isn't easy, but it's worthy. And I think it keeps reforming what it means to me. So like a striving that I might have had when I was in my 20s that would have looked a lot like, what are the credentials I'm going to get? Where am I going to go to school? Who am I going to impress? Everybody loves that I'm doing this. That has all fallen away through a constant clarity that keeps coming through every time that I reach a new transformation. That's like, I just want to be more me. And it actually never feels good. It feels good for a minute to get someone's praise, but I think that praise is as toxic as criticism, because we just get attached. It's like, I'm trying to not be criticized and I'm trying to only get praise. And then but that was like the nourishment in my family growing up. I mean, it was like, you look beautiful. Oh, I'm so proud of you. You did. And so then to start to buck that system and say, I don't care, or to hear things like someone say, Rebecca seems really directionless. We don't know what's happening. She keeps changing her mind on what she's going to do for a living. And I'm like, oh, that is so them, and that's not me. And I'm comfortable with what I'm doing. And so I think it's that happiness, like Andrea's talking about. I'm coming back to an internal compass of like, am I loving this? Does this nourish me? Do I feel grounded, content, happy with my daily life? I do. And so we're good. But also there is constant work. So I love that you bring in, Christine, this idea of like, it's not a destination. And I think that was probably the most important transformational work, was when it was recognizing, oh, I'm going to do this thing, but that could change again. I'm going to become like, I want to be more, with my emotions, and this is great, and this is the answer. Of course, I always think this is the answer to everything, and then it's like something else arises and you go, oh, there's this other thing that it was, like Andrea saying, my blind spot, this thing I'm not looking at. And now I realize, oh, in my relationships, I'm good with myself, but maybe in my relationships I'm like neglectful. And now that's a whole thing to look at and think about, how do I want to show up in a relationship? Right now it's my relationship to the natural world, and it feels like, how do I be more, I want to go take a forest bath. That sounds amazing. What is it? Like,
I will show you.
Okay, great. But it's like, oh, and then I recognize it's not as easy as saying, I want to be more connected to the natural world. It's like recognizing all the obstacles in front of me, all the ways that I choose comfort over that. And so but I love it. I'm still an insight junkie. I'm still like, I love that process of growth and constant growth. And so that's kind of what I want to share, what I want people to know. I want you to know, is just that sense of, a lot of times people will come into, when I was an intern, a client came in and said, when I go to learn to work out with a physical trainer, we do 4 sessions and then I know what my workout is. So I need to do 4 sessions with you and then I want to be fixed. And I was like, oh, okay. I don't accept the premise of this assignment, but okay. Yeah. I'm just an intern. Why are you asking so much of me? But I think we think that sometimes, like, I just need to fix one thing. And yeah, I'll just share. I had a professor who would say, you're perfect just as you are, and you need a little work. And that statement is always true of everyone. We're ultimately perfect. So stop trying so hard to find fault with yourself. And you could work. And in the end, there's some freedom in like that choice. Like I could choose to work on my relationship with nature. I could also choose not to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, what you brought up came with so many different avenues leading into one thing that in my mind, I couldn't help but create pictures with my imagination about what you were talking about. So instead of taking your words and making them so one dimensional, I expanded them to feel them in a different way. And I think that we forget to do that sometimes. Like we have a feeling and we just sit in that feeling, but to actually open our mind and maybe associate a color or an object or a scenery or something, this is, big in meditation as well. It's like, picture this, imagine you're somewhere. And I was wondering if we could kind of play a little game right here. And that is to like pick something. You could pick grief, you can pick joy, you can pick struggle. Like, and what is that? If you were to paint a picture, just describe a picture about what that means to you. I mean, almost like from start to finish, right? So not just, so like for me, just to, kick us off, for me, I'll pick grief, which as I say over and over again, is not just about end of life. It's about emotional loss. It's about relationship change. It's about a lack of identity, being stuck in our lives, moving. So many things is grief. And ultimately, it creates this feeling of emptiness, loneliness, despair that we feel. And so for me, like grief, to paint an image is this deep hole that somebody has dug. So it's raw, right? It's muddy. It's not smooth. It's rough. And you can jump in it, which means you can also climb out of it, but it's not pretty, right? It's just this rough dug hole. And when I'm in it, I'm like a black colored character. I don't have eyes. I don't have a face. I don't have ears. It's almost like a stick figure essentially in the color black, matching the mood, right? And then I climb out and it's a little foggy. It's a little cloudy. But as you go up the picture, you start to get to green nature, green grass, green gardens, but very green and white. That's it. Like not a whole bunch of other colors. And then all of a sudden, these puffy clouds. And I'm going to take this next image from an energy healing that I just did, which then there are these huge hands made out of white, puffy clouds, but they're really big, not necessarily strong, but like, that whatever goes in these hands are going to be protected, cared for, like nurtured and removed if necessary. And that's what's at the top. It's like, that's how I picture grief for me, that there is a way out. There's a way to comfort, and it's not pretty when you're in it, but you can get out. There are ways to get out. So that's just what I was coming up with. And I'd be curious for what just immediately comes to your mind. Like we don't want to overthink, because then you overthink. And you're like, well, all the colors in the crayon box are there, and
Yeah. No. Well, I have a sort of ready image because I had done work years ago when I was really in an intense grief place, and we would it was a mixture of movement and art and sharing. I mean, it was a women's circle and it was sort of whatever you were bringing, but everyone has some version, like you said. You can easily be like, let me illuminate that you actually walk with grief every day. And so first we had danced, and then it was like you go to this paper on the wall and you sort of had your outline of your body, and it was like just whatever color you feel and just paint. And so I'm just doing the assignment, yes, this is the color that wants to come. And then we go and we sit in the circle, and one by one we talk about, now we're looking at your piece, what do you see or whatever. And I looked and I was like, oh my God, it's so dark. I didn't even know I had painted predominantly black and red. And I just burst into tears. Like I was like, yeah, that's what I feel like. And then through the process, we danced again. We came back to our paintings. We painted some more of what's the medicine, and like thinking of the medicine for whatever you're feeling and painting that. And I love where it went, because in the end I painted, more of just a three-dimensional sort of representation of myself, not completely, not accurate by any stretch of the imagination, but she's crying, and then her feet are like roots, and the tears are just nourishing the roots, and it wasn't planned. Again, it was just like, I don't know, roots go here, I don't know, this goes here, I was just doing it. But it's one I come back to, and the tears were like a river running through her heart, and then coming like down her arms that were, had leaves, and then down these branchy roots. And I've like said before, in so many ways, I think our tears are needed because the world is in such a drought. And it's that imagery for me where I'm like, that is what grief is for me. So I actually feel like a stuck sadness sometimes, where tears won't come. And then I feel really sad about that. And like, I need some tears. Like, let's watch a heartbreaking movie. Like, let me read a story that's really going to just crack my heart, because they're essential for they're nourishing to me, and sort of bring me into that place that you're describing of like, and then there's layers, and it's like, then it's green, but I have to go in first to move through it. So that's the visual I have.
Andrea, I'm just going right to you.
Oh, sure. Well, I made Rebecca go first because I have this condition called aphantastic. So if you're going to have a condition, like, this is the one to have, because I sound like a superhero. But essentially what it means is, like, when we close our eyes is black. Like, I don't see imagery. So I never liked meditation, because they would be like, imagine yourself on a toadstool in a forest. And I'm like, are you seeing that for real? So I'm always amazed when people can just be like, I'm seeing this thing. I'm like, wow, because I see blackness. But
which
so
I wonder if that means something too.
I have to pull on other tools, is what I have to do when I do sort of like imagery, and my imagery is just different. But when you first asked, what I was thinking about was love. I think about love a lot. And I think, and not like a Pollyanna sort of version of love, because I actually think that living into unconditional love is so fucking hard, is so hard. Because we get so many messages about why we shouldn't love ourselves, and why we shouldn't love other people, and why maybe love needs to be earned by ourselves, from maybe even through your religious practice. Like, love from your God or your creator could be something given and taken away. And so we have such a messed up idea of love. And then we have this sort of like romanticized version of love, that it comes from a partner, and it's going to be now is the season right now. I don't know when this will air, but now is the season of like Christmas movies, where it's like, we'll meet the stranger in the tree farm, and then our life will suddenly have purpose, and
everybody's drinking hot chocolate,
and everybody drinks hot chocolate and likes it, And so when I think about, for me, love, it is for me personally a divine gift, though not from like a being. Like, I don't personally believe in like a God, or like a sort of like human personified thing that gives us things and takes things away. But it is this sort of divine thing that we all have and we all share. And so for me, it's this thing that fills up our sort of soul body, and it kind of like stretches up throughout universe and throughout time and space, connecting us all forever. And we all have it. That doesn't mean we all act from that place all the time. Like, like the gift from universe or creator is that we all are created from and imbued with pure unconditional love. Our choices to sometimes turn away from that place and not love ourselves, and not love each other, and not love Mother Earth, whatever it is, like, those are our choices, but we can always turn back to it. But it's really hard. And so when you were talking about, I was thinking about like how I think about like that divine love, that unconditional love. And to me, it's like a very bright white light. But when I ask my boys, like, what does your love look like? Like one of my little boys, his is like neon yellow. I bet Rebecca knows which one it is. You know? The other one, his is also like a white light. And so we all have this, and remembering it and touching into it and thinking about it when we're having a hard time loving ourselves and loving others, I think for me is another piece of like constant work for myself, you know, when I'm like, no, I really feel bad feelings towards this individual. I try to lean into it, and it's not easy, but it's also not naive. Like, I think the idea is like, yeah, love, we all are loved and we all should love each other. And I'm like, no, really, I think if we all loved ourselves and loved each other, a lot of the bad things that we do to ourselves and each other would go away. Like, it's in its simplicity is its answer, but that doesn't mean it's easy.
You know, the more you spoke about it, the more I kept seeing in my mind the word acceptance, because I think that's almost the part of love that keeps us from loving ourselves or from loving other people in a very genuine, authentic way. And I think that's also why the deep grief that I did feel when we lost our Maya Ray, our Sheltie, our fur family member, because that was a love I'd never had before. And she taught me that that was possible, because I had no choice but to accept in that love all the rough things that she brought, you know, her high GI stress, like her elbow that was injured. I mean, she just required so much attention that if I didn't accept it, then I might have regretted her, right? I might have been like, well, I got to go home because the dog gets anxious. No, I was like, I want to leave early. I want to go home to my dog. Like, I know she gets anxious. I want to go be with her. And there was that level of acceptance that I don't think we were taught when we were raised, because that's really advanced, right? Like if you deeply think about it, we're not taught love and acceptance. We're just taught, you know, love and do it according to these rules.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, kind of whatever those rules are, you know, they might be, like I said, they could be societal rules, they could be religious rules, they could be familial rules. But absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I want to say it was Rebecca Feinclass that when we interviewed her, I think there's a chapter in her book about acceptance, and she talked about she always thought acceptance was like, you know, okay, I love that my dog has a bad elbow and GI stress, but like that actually it was, I wish this wasn't what was happening, and I accept that this is what's happening.
Yeah.
And from that place,
I feel that really deeply. I feel that really deeply. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's that. And from that place, we can love. You know, we can feel like, okay, now I can find how I love this life that is not exactly what I imagined, or a life without a person that I love, or a fur baby that I love. Like that, it's like, okay, this is what happened. And I don't inherently love it. I actually inherently hate that this is what's happening. And I love myself enough, and I'm accepting that this is what I'm moving forward with. And, you know, I think that that's such a huge piece of grief work, is like finding a way to keep your heart open and staying connected to love while it shouldn't have happened. It's sort of like my sister will say of her loss, you know, oh yeah, I've learned a lot and I've grown a lot, and I would trade all of that to have my child back. Like, you know, so it's never the imperative, like, oh, it's going to be good for you and you're going to learn a lot. It's just like, it just is also what happens alongside something devastating.
Yeah, it's kind of like that saying where you go through something difficult, really challenging, heartbreaking, and you come out stronger on the other end. And I don't feel that way because, like you just mentioned, I don't want to be stronger because I've grieved so immensely for Maya or for all the other things in my life. I just want to learn what I can and how to apply that pain into a purpose to continue saying their name or to continue with what was so important for me to understand about myself in that loss, whatever it was. But I can't remember if I said this when I was on your podcast. You guys were so wonderful to have me on your show, that I repeat a meditation every night when I put my head on my pillow. And the very first line is, may I be filled with acceptance, gratitude, and love. And I needed that in my deep grief because I was not accepting it. And doing that every night and repeating it until I went to sleep, with a few other sentences as well. I can't believe the impact that it had on me. So like these words, what we say to ourselves, the way that we can shift that thinking from one way to another to look at love differently in a form of true acceptance, even if it's not what we wanted it to be, but it's like, okay, here I am now, is so powerful.
Absolutely. And I have like this deep grievance I've been thinking about a lot, but mostly this week I was listening to a podcast and it just set me off again. But it is this obsession that we have around, and I don't know. I've lived in one other country, but most of my life has been in America. And we have this pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like, we love a hardship story. We love it. We love resilience. We love grit, and I'm like, and I think when we've come through hard things, there is this idea that we say that, like, here's the gift in it. And I'm with Rebecca's sister. I'm like, I would rather, like, if you gave me a choice and was like, you could have your dad, but you would still be like working your ass off and still be performer self, I am positive I would choose having my dad. Even though I feel really content in this life, and I would hope that I would find this path anyway while still getting to have him in my life. But I would choose that. And there is this idea that out of something tragic, out of something traumatic, we have to rise up and become even better human beings. And it is so curious because I remember when I was deciding to homeschool my boys, and a good friend of mine was like shocked and appalled. And she was like, I was sort of like describing to her, I'm like, I have 1,000 reasons, but I'm willing to share with you 3 because frankly, it's none of your business. But here you go. Here's 3 reasons. And she countered them with like, I wouldn't be who I am today if basically I hadn't like been bullied and learned how to become like an overachiever. And I was like, I believe that. Like, I believe that you wouldn't be who that is today. But I wonder who my boys will be when their foundation is love and not fear, when they're motivated. Like, fear is a motivator. I'm not denying that. Or trauma, that is a motivator. But love is too. I'm like, and I wonder what they're going to be when they don't have to undo the years of bullying or being traumatized by having to hide in case a shooter comes into their school, or they're told to perform like other kids who don't think and act like them. And I was like, I wonder what they're going to be if they just get to be themselves. And so I just would love for us to let go of this story that like horrible things make us better people. Like, sometimes horrible things are just horrible things and we make a choice. And I also think like, I'm lucky that, somewhere within me was rooted and there was like a support system where I could make choices that didn't take me on a downward spiral. Because I know so many people who went through traumas or grief or hardship that was worse than mine, who have taken an off ramp and never been able to get back on. So I'm like, we also only hear the stories of those of us who like made choices and had emotional, financial, like different systems in place to allow us to sort of like rise above. And we sort of forget about how many people are unable to do that. So yeah, I'm just like, can we shake this like trauma breeds better people story? I hate it. I would love for there not to be trauma in the world. That's my wish.
Yeah. Rebecca, I have a feeling you have some comments.
A little bit. Try to keep it brief. It's funny because I have a friend who shared this with me. I haven't looked into it to find out if it's true or not, but she said that actually, there's the saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. They've
Yes.
actually done research that it makes you weaker. And so it's a story, it's a fantasy, it's a narrative we have that actually can end up shaming people who can't, who are like, I can't seem to get out of this. Like you're talking about, Andrea, there's not a way for me to get out of this like rut that I'm in or struggle that I'm in. And I always think it's really this tricky line because there's a both and. So I do believe like we shouldn't be in this world of black and white, sort of like just think happy thoughts, things are going to be great. And I have a friend of mine who we are constantly like turning this over because they're struggling with a terminal cancer diagnosis, and they're like, "Am I like not thinking my way out of this? Am I not being positive enough that I'm going to heal? Is everyone going to think I'm responsible for my death?" There's this constant, and I'm like, "Oh no, I will never think that. And if anyone thinks that, I promise I'll punch them." Like, and I'm not a violent person, so this is big. But I was like, I won't allow it. I just won't allow it. But there is something to like shifting your focus. And this was a thing that their therapist had told them. We only have control on what we turn our attention to. And so there is something like when you're going to bed at night and you're saying, I want, I don't remember the exact words, like acceptance, gratitude, like I choose these things. It's like, I know that there is something that brings me a little bit more life force whenever I start my morning thinking, I'm so grateful for this, this, and this. But it's never at the cost of my actual sad emotions, angry emotion. I mean, when I'm angry, I'm like, I'm so glad I feel fire in my body because what just happened was so wrong. Like, so I'm like grateful for my anger and I'm grateful for my sadness. So it's something where I'm saying yes to the experience of being human. I'm not trying to control it from the perspective of like, well, you shouldn't be sad that I don't know, like the package wasn't delivered today because you have so much. And it's just like, you know what, I'm just going to be sad today. And also I do have so much. And it's both. So it's like this both and I think it can get tricky because our society has done so much like just be grateful, just be grateful, just be grateful. And it's like, but also be sad, be angry when you're angry, like be in what's real when it's real. And being too much in any one direction, choosing to never experience gratitude is gonna great. You're stifling something that's also natural, or to never feel joy is like there something's blocking that or something stifling that because there's a whole human experience to be having. So it's just tricky, but I do think that there's a worthiness in something around gratitude and something around acceptance. It's just not in the way our culture has packaged it. Where it's,
Yeah, and I totally agree. Like, I'm not saying like,
I didn't think you were.
yeah,
I
but
just
yeah,
wanted to like
it's
flesh
the
it out. Yeah.
packaging. It is absolutely the packaging that like we should be
Good vibes
grateful for
only.
every trauma. And I'm like, no, some trauma should never have happened. Some
Yeah.
things that people have experienced should never have happened. And you don't have to be grateful that you made it through. Like, I'm grateful you're alive, but like, you don't have to be grateful for that experience. So yeah, it's in the packaging. And then on the other side of it, like we make choices every day. And I love that about where we focus our attention and what we're looking at and what we're honoring. And we can honor all of it. Like we can honor, like, I wish that had never happened. And I honor that I'm here today. I'm like, so yeah, thank you.
Yes, I can't tell you the number of times I've received texts from friends who are like, today is so hard. I just kind of want to get back into bed and maybe watch a movie. And
Yeah.
I'll respond and say, do it.
Thank
Do
you.
it. Get back in
Great
bed
answer.
and do it. And they'll go, no, it's okay. I'm going to dust myself off. And I'm going to go do this and this and this and this. And it just goes along with what we've really said a lot in this episode, which is we're just too accustomed to being told not to feel those feelings, especially if it's not joy, if it's not gratitude. Like even when I was grieving with Maya, I was like 3 months in, and somebody had texted me, and said, "How are you doing today?" Asked how I was doing today. I said, "Today's hard. Yesterday was pretty good. Today is hard." And the response was, "Well, just be so grateful that you got to love her." And I immediately shut down, and I didn't even respond. I'm like, "Don't take my feelings from me. I'm not going to let you take my feelings from me," because I've learned how important it is to sit in that sadness, to sit in that disappointment, to just let myself feel it so that the next day can be a little bit better. That is grief. Well,
Yes.
you guys, thank you so, so much. What a special episode to have the both of you. I mean, who knows? This may be the one and only episode that I just have the two of you, which means you'll have to come back on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you'll have to come back on. So listeners, I hope you loved. I mean, this episode was so special, and we went a little differently with our conversation, but I love the feeling of it. As Andrea mentioned, we're less than a week out from Christmas, a week and a half from New Year's, and it just felt right to just have this warm feeling and conversation. So please, if you want to have a conversation with them, remember, their information is in the show notes as usual. Reach out to them, follow their podcast, All the Grief, follow them on Instagram. Their posts are just so comforting and beautiful. So the two of you, thank you again so much for being here. And listeners, until next time, enjoy yourself, enjoy the moment, and try to discover what your unconscious evolution is. Until next time.